Have you ever lost a childhood object that felt, completely and inextricably linked to your sense of self?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And I am not just talking about a misplaced toy that you cried over for a day.
Right, right. Something deeper.
Exactly. I mean, something foundational. Maybe it was a specific wool blanket that smelled a certain way, or a worn-out baseball glove that had perfectly molded to your hand.
Or even a heavy piece of furniture in your house that you claimed as your designated, indisputable spot.
Yeah, your spot. Now imagine you were a child, and that object just vanishes from your life during a period of, well, immense turmoil and grief.
Which is devastating.
It really is. You mourn it. But, time does what time does. You eventually grow up, you build an entirely new life, you bury that specific longing, and then
Out of
nowhere, decades later, it miraculously returns to you. How would you even process that? What would that sudden physical collision of your past and your present actually feel like?
It is a really profound scenario, and it forces us to look at a concept in psychology known as the extended mind thesis, or at least a variation of it.
Okay, the extended mind thesis. Tell me about that.
Well, we tend to think of our memories as these purely internal, abstract files stored neatly in the hippocampus. But the truth is, human beings are incredibly tactile creatures.
Right, we like to touch things.
Exactly. We outsource our memories to the objects around us. We use our physical environment to anchor our internal states.
So when those objects are abruptly removed,
Especially during childhood, it can genuinely feel like a piece of your personal history has been amputated.
wow, amputated. That is a strong word.
It is, but it's accurate. And when they return, it is not just the wood or the fabric or the leather coming back. It is an entire era of your life.
Like an entire version of yourself demanding to be felt again.
Exactly.
I really love that phrase, outsourcing our memories. And that brings us to the core of our deep dive today. We are looking at a beautifully written, deeply evocative piece of source material by Knapton.
It's a fantastic piece.
It really is. It was published on TrueStoriesWellTold.com, and it's titled The Victorian Seamstress Rocker and the Gift of Memory.
And our mission today is to trace the physical and emotional journey of this one single, very specific antique rocking chair.
Right. We are going to explore how physical objects act as these somatic anchors for our childhood memories, how they can actually help us process profound grief and, the unexpected long-term lessons they teach us about human kindness.
It really is a magnificent tapestry of a story, because this is not merely an appraisal of a piece of antique furniture changing hands.
Right. It's not Antiques Roadshow.
Exactly. It is a psychological lens. Through the journey of this one chair, we can examine the often painful transition from childhood into adulthood.
Yeah.
The intense friction between nostalgia and practical survival, and the beautiful, complex ways that small communities hold on to their shared, invisible histories.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the emotional weight of this chair, we can't start with the author's childhood. We have to travel way, way back before Lorien was even born.
We have to go back to 1848.
Right, to a newly built house on Oneida Street in Portage, Wisconsin. And to understand 1848 in Portage, we have to talk about the dawn of the American Railroad era.
Which was huge.
Huge. This was not a quiet little suburb. Portage was a thriving, chaotic hub for rail travel. The neighborhood surrounding this house was absolutely packed with railroad conductors, brakemen, rail yard mechanics, and depot attendants.
Just buzzing with activity.
Totally. The house itself was situated directly across from the railroad depot. It was flanked by 4 different taverns and the Oneida Hotel.
4 taverns.
Right. And this hotel served as a 24-hour layover spot for these traveling railmen between their grueling shifts.
If we really sit with that historical context, you can almost feel the vibrations in the floorboards. The ambient noise of that era in a town like Portage would have been relentless.
Oh, I bet.
The hissing of pressurized steam, the clanging of iron on iron, the shouts of rail yard workers.
Just constant noise.
Constant churning turnover of working-class men coming and going at all hours of the day and night. It was an environment entirely defined by heavy industry and masculine motion.
Right. It was loud, it was dirty, and it was vital.
Yeah. And right in the middle of all that industrial bustle, inside this 1848 house on Oneida Street, sits the original owner of our chair, a woman working as a seamstress.
Exactly. And her job was incredibly demanding. She spent her days sitting in this specific rocking chair, painstakingly tailoring and mending the heavy wool uniforms for those local railroad workers.
Which is backbreaking work.
Right. Think about the physical exertion of that. This is not light silk or cotton. She is wrestling with thick, heavy industrial fabrics.
Repairing tears from coal shoveling and ironworking.
And she is doing it for hours on end, day after day, year after year.
Which brings us to the engineering of the chair itself. Because a piece of furniture meant to support that kind of labor is a marvel of Victorian craftsmanship.
Tell me about the chair.
The author describes it as a Victorian seamstress rocker. It is a solid oak glider. It has a richly carved back, a deeply tufted leather seat, and this is a critical functional detail, delicate front wheels.
Wheels on a rocking chair.
Yeah. It was already considered a heavy, imposing antique by the time the mid-20th century rolled around. But let's break down why it was built that way. A seamstress in 1848 wasn't sitting for leisure.
No, she was working.
She was engaging in intense, repetitive physical labor.
Right. The chair was essentially her primary piece of industrial equipment.
Precisely. If we look at the broader picture of craftsmanship then versus modern manufacturing now, the contrast is staggering.
Oh, totally.
Today, our environments are filled with disposable furniture. We buy flat pack items made of particle board and veneer, held together by tiny wooden dowels and an Allen wrench.
And they break the second you move apartments.
Exactly. They are designed with planned obsolescence in mind, meant to last maybe a decade before they end up in a landfill. But a solid oak, Victorian seamstress rocker with a tufted leather seat, that is an object engineered for permanence.
It was built to last.
It was built to support the shifting weight of a human body through 10 to 12 hours of meticulous labor. The glider mechanism is particularly brilliant because it allowed for subtle, continuous movement.
Which keeps the circulation going.
Right. It kept the seamstress's circulation flowing in her legs while she worked. The solid oak provided unyielding lumbar support.
And what about the wheels?
The front wheels allowed her to easily pivot or slide the heavy chair to reach different materials or adjust her angle to the natural light coming through the window.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought about the wheels in that context. That is fascinating.
It's pure functional design.
To me, it feels like the oak wood acts almost like a hard drive for muscle memory. It is incredible how an object can completely outlive the era and the specific utility it was built for.
It really is.
It literally held this woman as she worked, absorbing the rhythm of her labor. When you encounter a piece of furniture like that, you can feel that it is not just a thing. It is a testament to the person who used it.
It is a record of human habitation. The concept of absorb history is deeply resonant here.
Absorb history.
Every nick in the solid oak, every softened, polished crease in the tufted leather is a physical ledger of the human beings who sought comfort or utility from it.
Right.
When an object is built with that level of integrity, it transcends its original purpose. It becomes a permanent fixture in the changing landscape of a house.
And that historical weight is exactly what makes the chair's eventual role in the author's life so incredibly poignant. Because we are going to jump forward roughly 100 years.
A huge leap.
Yeah, the railroad era has peaked and evolved, the world has completely modernized, and we find ourselves in the late 1950s. Lorian's parents buy this exact same house on Oneida Street.
Same house, new era.
Exactly. Now, the house is very much showing its age. It is over a century old at this point, and it is in desperate need of updating. But her parents are young and ambitious.
So they dive in.
They take on a massive mortgage and these huge, sweeping dreams of renovation. And the Victorian seamstress rocker. It was just left behind. It came with the house.
It was essentially inherited architecture at that point, a remnant from a bygone era that simply refused to leave the room.
Right, and this is the part I find so compelling. How does an imposing, heavy 19th century industrial artifact become the emotional epicenter of a 1960s childhood?
It's a great question.
Because a lot of people, when they buy an old house and find a massive Victorian antique, they either throw it out or they treat it like a museum piece.
Yes. The modern instinct is often preservation at the cost of utility. We cordon antiques off. We place delicate doilies on them.
Don't touch that.
Right. We scold children for even breathing too heavily near them. But the beauty of this story is that young Lorian didn't see a priceless antique. She saw a functional piece of her everyday environment.
To her, it was a sanctuary.
Exactly.
She lived in it. Lorian vividly describes her time in this glider. She talks about being a first grader, curled up in that tufted leather seat, learning to read her Dick and Jane books.
Which is such a classic image.
It really is. She mentions sounding out the words, reading about Dick, Jane, and their puppy spot. She talks about holding her favorite baby doll, rocking back and forth and back.
Using the gentle glide of the chair to soothe the doll to sleep.
Yes. And she also used it as a place of emotional processing. When her mother would discipline her and put her in timeout to think about her behavior, Lorian would sit in that chair, angry and defiant.
Kicking her feet against the solid oak rungs.
Aggressively kicking the rungs.
If we analyze the psychology here, it explains exactly why physical objects serve as such powerful, indelible anchors for childhood memories.
Break that down for me.
When you are a young child, your cognitive development is deeply intertwined with your somatic or bodily development. You don't just experience the world abstractly.
Right, you experience it physically.
Exactly. The rhythmic, predictable motion of a glider is incredibly important. Rocking stimulates the vestibular system.
Okay, vestibular system.
Which is located in the inner ear and is responsible for our sense of balance and spatial orientation. When a child rocks, it actually regulates their central nervous system. It drops their heart rate.
Oh, wow.
It literally self-soothes the brain.
Wait, really? So when she is rocking her baby doll, she is actually regulating her own nervous system?
Exactly. She is mirroring maternal pair, yes, but the physical act of rocking the chair is grounding her own physiology.
That is so interesting.
And it extends to her moments of anger, too. The tactile sensation of the tufted leather, the solid, unyielding resistance of a thick oak rung against a kicking shoe when you're frustrated.
It gives you something to push against.
Right. These are not just background details of a memory. The chair was acting as an emotional crucible. It was the physical environment helping a child process incredibly complex emotional states.
So the wood absorbed her frustration just as effectively as it absorbed the seamstress's physical labor a century prior.
It absolutely did.
It was quite literally absorbing her developmental milestones. From the nurturing instinct of pretend play, to the intellectual leap of learning how to read a book, to the emotional regulation of processing boundaries during a timeout, the chair held it all.
And we must also consider the stark juxtaposition between this micro-environment of the chair and the macro-environment of the neighborhood.
Oh, this is fascinating, yeah. Because outside the front door, the neighborhood hasn't changed its stripes. It is still flanked by the railroad depot, the hotel, and 4 taverns.
Right.
Lorian even describes the neighborhood as rough, yet she explicitly notes that despite the taverns and the transient nature of the area, the children felt completely safe.
They had the freedom to roam freely until dusk.
Fearlessly roaming the neighborhood.
It highlights a very specific sociological era of American childhood. The boundaries of safety in the mid-20th century were less about manicured, gated cul-de-sacs and more about the watchful eye of a tight-knit working-class community.
That makes a lot of sense.
The neighborhood was objectively rough around the edges, filled with the noise and grit of the taverns and the rail yard. But the home, and specifically this heavy oak chair situated within the home, was the absolute, unshakable center of gravity.
It was the eye of the hurricane.
Beautifully put.
Sounds idyllic. A rough and tumble world outside, but a deeply anchored, safe harbor inside. But the terrifying thing about relying on a piece of furniture as your emotional anchor is that, as a child, you don't actually own it.
No, you don't.
You have zero control over your environment. You are entirely at the mercy of the adult world. And when the adult world shatters, the child's sanctuary is completely vulnerable.
Which brings us to a devastating pivot in the narrative. Childhood cannot remain suspended in amber.
No.
Reality inevitably intrudes, and in the story, the intrusion is absolute and catastrophic.
Yeah. In 1967, when Lorian is just 10 years old, her father suddenly passes away.
It's heartbreaking.
It is a tragic, world-shattering turning point for this family. And I want to set the scene here because context is everything. This tragedy strikes while the house on Oneida Street is still in the middle of these massive, all-encompassing renovations.
The timing is awful.
Just terrible. Her mother is suddenly thrust into widowhood. She is grieving. She is entirely responsible for a huge mortgage on a house that is literally torn apart by construction.
And she is trying to raise a grieving 10-year-old daughter.
Right.
We need to pause and deeply analyze the environmental psychology of what this child was experiencing.
Let's do it.
A home is fundamentally meant to be a sanctuary. It is the primary layer of defense a child has against the chaos of the outside world. When you lose a parent at the age of 10, your internal world, your psychological foundation, is completely destabilized.
It's completely ripped away.
Exactly. In that state of acute trauma, you desperately need your external world to remain constant, predictable, and solid.
But her external world was the exact opposite of that. The house is undergoing massive renovations.
Precisely. Because of the construction, the physical house itself is in a state of violent transition. The walls might be open, the floors are disrupted, there are strangers, contractors walking in and out of her private spaces.
It must have felt so invasive.
There is constant noise, dust, and a profound lack of privacy. The architectural vulnerability of the house is perfectly mirroring the psychological vulnerability of her grief. Every single thing in her life feels exposed and unstable.
That is an unbearable amount of chaos for a 10-year-old brain to process. And into this hyper-vulnerable, chaotic environment walks a carpenter.
Right.
Lorian's mother, despite her grief, has to keep moving forward. She has to finish the house. So she hires a carpenter to complete the remodels. And this carpenter brings along his helper, a young man named Mark. Mark. Lorian describes Mark as easygoing, with an ambitious spirit and a brand new fiancée named Janelle. And what's interesting is how Lorian describes her own behavior during this time. She calls her 10-year-old self pesty and in the way of the workers.
That specific self-description, being pesty or in the way, is a classic textbook manifestation of a grieving child.
Wait, really? How so?
When a child experiences a profound loss, and their primary caregiver in this case, her mother is utterly overwhelmed by her own grief and the terrifying practical burdens of survival, the child often feels emotionally adrift.
So they look for an anchor somewhere else.
They unconsciously seek out other sources of stability and attention. Hovering around a safe, non-threatening adult who is working in the house, talking their ear off, asking a million questions.
It's not just them being annoying.
No, this isn't just a child being annoying. It is a desperate, unconscious strategy to seek reassurance and connection. They are trying to anchor themselves to anyone who seems grounded.
And Mark was grounded.
Mark, to his immense credit, seems to intuitively understand this on some level. Despite trying to do his job, he handles this grieving, talkative child with remarkable grace and patience.
But here's where the story takes a turn that I really struggle with.
Okay, let's hear it.
While Mark is working in the house, he falls in love with the Victorian seamstress rocker. He admires the craftsmanship. He asks Lorian's mother on several different occasions if she would be willing to sell it to him.
And she says no at first?
Initially, yes. The mother resists. She says no. But as the renovations finally draw to a close, she changes her mind. She actually calls Mark's fiancée, Janelle, and offers to sell them the chair for $50.
And that's it.
And just like that, the sale is made. The chair is gone. I have to be honest, I am genuinely angry on behalf of 10-year-old Lorian.
I can see why.
$50. Her mother sold her grieving child's emotional support object, her sanctuary, to a random carpenter for $50. That feels incredibly callous.
I understand that reaction completely. From the perspective of the child, it feels like a profound betrayal, but we have to step back and look at the macroeconomic and psychological reality of a suddenly widowed woman in 1967.
Okay, I'm listening.
We cannot judge her through the lens of modern therapeutic parenting.
Okay, explain it to me. Because right now, I just see a kid losing her favorite chair.
Let's break down the economics first. $50 in 1967 is not the $50 in your wallet today.
Right, inflation.
Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly equivalent to about $450 to $500 today. Now, put yourself in the mother's shoes. You have just lost your husband. You have dropped from a two-income household, or perhaps a sole male breadwinner household, to a single-income widow in the 1960s.
Which was a time when women had significantly less financial autonomy.
Exactly. You are saddled with a massive mortgage that you now have to pay alone. You are hemorrhaging money on a house renovation that was started before your husband died.
Right.
And you have to pay the very carpenters who are standing in your living room.
Wow. Okay, when you put it like that, it sounds terrifying.
It is sheer survival mode. To the mother, a massive, heavy Victorian antique might just look like clutter. Or, more importantly, it looks like an opportunity to recoup a week or two of groceries.
It's liquid cash.
It is a quick influx of desperately needed cash to pay the contractors and regain some financial footing. She is not trying to hurt her daughter. She is trying to keep the roof over her daughter's head.
Man, okay, I stand corrected. I guess it really is a survival response. But still, as a 10-year-old, you don't understand macroeconomic inflation or mortgage rates.
No, you don't.
You just know your safe space is gone.
Exactly. And that is the tragedy of it. To the mother, this was a deeply practical, necessary adult transaction meant to ensure their survival. But to the daughter, it was an emotional severing.
Totally.
The emotional weight of the chair's departure cannot be overstated for Lorian. For her, the chair was the only constant stabilizing presence in a house that was physically and emotionally torn apart.
Right, because everything else was changing.
Losing it meant losing yet another piece of her father's era in that house. It functions as a secondary loss that aggressively compounds the primary loss of her dad.
It is the ultimate clash between the crushing pragmatism of adulthood and the raw sentimentality of childhood. And really, it serves as a necessary, if incredibly painful, stepping stone from childhood to adulthood.
It forces her to grow up.
Yeah. Lorien herself writes that she remembers being profoundly sad the day the rocker left. But she notes, quote, "Life went forward, and over time, I forgot about it."
That's survival, too.
And that's what we do, right? We compartmentalize. She grew up, she went to high school, got married, had children of her own, built an entirely new life. And eventually, decades later, in 1996, she moved to an old farmhouse in Columbia County's Caledonia Hills.
And this geographical move is the pivot that sets up the second half of our narrative perfectly.
How so?
Because while she moved away from Oneida Street, she didn't move far enough to escape the gravitational pull of her own history. The timeline shifts forward several decades, moving us from a child's raw, unprocessed grief to an adult's complex, unexpected reunion.
Right, so fast forward about 5 years after she moves to the farmhouse in the Caledonia Hills. It's roughly the year 2001. Lorien is attending a neighborhood card party.
A classic local event.
Totally a classic local social gathering. And who does she bump into at this party? Mark and his wife, Janelle.
Wow.
The very same carpenter's helper who bought the chair over 30 years ago.
This is a beautiful illustration of the sociology of small towns. In rural or semi-rural areas like Portage and the surrounding Columbia County, you have these overlapping, highly interconnected lives.
Everyone knows everyone.
Sociologists refer to this as a network of weak ties that are incredibly durable. It creates a unique environment where the past is never truly erased or lost to anonymity.
It just sits down across from you at a different card table decades later.
Exactly.
It is so true. You can't escape your past in a small town. And their interaction at this party is fascinating. Lorien recognizes Mark, and her first instinct is to apologize.
That is so telling.
She actually apologizes for being an annoying, pesty, talkative 10-year-old while he was trying to work on her house during that traumatic time all those years ago.
Wow.
And Mark, who's now a much older man, smiles and offers this exceedingly kind lie. He looks at her and says, "Oh, you weren't that annoying."
I love that phrase, an exceedingly kind lie.
Yeah.
It is such a sharp, beautiful observation of human behavior.
Right.
It demonstrates Mark's enduring, gentle nature. He is effortlessly bridging the gap between the young, patient carpenter he was in 1967 and the older, gracious man he has become.
He knew she needed to hear that.
He recognizes, perhaps implicitly, that she is looking for retroactive absolution for her childhood behavior. She feels guilty for how her grief manifested, and he freely, kindly gives her that absolution by waving it away.
But then the conversation naturally turns to the chair.
Yeah.
Lorien asks if they still have it. They say yes, they do. She asks if they still enjoy it. They say they absolutely do.
Which has to be a relief for her to hear.
Definitely. And then she confesses something deeply vulnerable. She tells them that, as a 10-year-old, she had begged her mother not to sell it. She admits how much it meant to her.
She puts it all out there.
She does. And upon hearing this, Mark looks at her with total sincerity right there at the card table and asks a simple question. He says, "Would you like it back?"
Oh, wow. And this is where we have to pause again. Because this interaction raises a massive question about social conditioning and how we navigate our emotional needs as adults.
Yes, it really does.
Because how does Lorien respond to the exact thing she wants?
It drives me crazy. She immediately blusters, "Oh, not at all. My mother wanted you to have it. I am just very happy it has a good home."
She completely deflects.
She completely shuts it down. And then Mark just smiles, accepts her answer, goes back to playing cards, and that's the end of it. She politely refuses the one thing her inner child is screaming to have back. Why on earth wouldn't she just say yes? He literally offered it.
Because we are witnessing the intense friction between the inner child and adult social conditioning. Why do we deny our deepest nostalgic desires in adult social settings?
Seriously, why do we do that?
As adults, we are deeply conditioned to suppress the raw wants of our inner child in favor of maintaining societal harmony. When Mark asks if she wants it back, her adult brain immediately calculates the social cost.
She doesn't want to inconvenience them.
Right. She doesn't want to appear greedy or ungracious to the reality that they have loved, polished, and cared for this antique chair for over 30 years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To say, yes, give it to me, feels to an adult like a violation of the polite social contract. So she prioritizes the polite fiction, I am just happy it has a good home, over her genuine foundational longing.
It is wild how our childhood memories heavily influence our adult emotions, but we immediately pave over them with this thick veneer of adult politeness.
We really do.
Lorien assumes that's the absolute end of the story. She writes that this card party in 2001 was the last time she actively thought about the chair. She had her closure. It was wrapped in a polite refusal, but it was closure nonetheless.
But here's the crux of the narrative. While Lorien thought the story permanently ended at that card table, human generosity operates on its own silent, unhurried timeline.
I love that.
The seeds of that interaction, her admission that she loved it and his offer to return it, were firmly planted. And those seeds would quietly germinate for many more years, leading to a shocking discovery.
Which brings us to present day, just last month. Lorien returns home to her farmhouse after an afternoon excursion. She walks up to her house, opens the door to the back entryway at the breezeway, and she says she was immediately violently transported back to her 10-year-old self.
Oh my gosh.
Because sitting right there in her breezeway, blocking her path in all its splendor, is the Victorian seamstress rocker.
It is a breathtaking moment. It is an ambush of memory.
That is exactly what it is. And her immediate physical observation of the chair is so interesting, and I want you to explain this to me.
Sure.
She looks at this solid oak glider with its richly carved back and the tufted leather seat, and her very first thought is that it looked smaller than she remembered. Why is that always a thing?
Oh, the shrinking effect.
Yeah. You go back to your elementary school and the water fountains are at your knees, or you see your childhood home and it looks like a dollhouse.
It is a universal phenomena, and it is a fascinating quirk of how our brains process and store information. It comes down to the cognitive psychology of episodic memory.
Okay, tell me about episodic memory.
When we encode a memory of a physical object or space during childhood, the hippocampus stores its spatial dimensions relative to our body size at that specific time.
So it's all relative to how small you were.
Right. When Lorien was a small child, that heavy Victorian oak chair wasn't just a place to sit, it was an entire landscape she had to physically navigate. It loomed large in her field of vision. Her episodic memory literally encoded the chair as massive.
So the memory is frozen in scale to a first grader's body.
Precisely. Fast forward half a century, she encounters it as a fully grown adult woman.
Yeah.
There is an immediate cognitive dissonance.
Right, because it's not massive anymore.
The object itself hasn't shrunk a single millimeter, but her brain has to rapidly execute a spatial recalibration. Her current physical reality is clashing with her encoded childhood memory.
That makes total sense.
That sudden realization that the object is smaller emphasizes the sheer, staggering span of time that has passed. It highlights the vast difference between the powerless little girl who kicked those rungs in anger and the adult woman standing in the breezeway.
It really highlights her own physical and emotional growth. But in the moment, she is just absolutely stunned. She realizes Mark and Janelle must have dropped it off, so she frantically starts scrambling to find a phone number for them.
And how does she find them?
Well, again, we see the rural dynamic at play. She notes that she relies on the grand tradition of the Caledonia Township, which is basically knowing someone who knows someone.
Oh, of course.
She doesn't hop on social media. She calls a couple of mutual neighbors to track them down through the grapevine.
Yes, it is the analog network of a small town. You navigate through the community's collective social memory to find the person you need.
It's so charming. So she finally gets the correct phone number and calls. Janelle answers the phone, and Lorien just blurts out, without even a hello or a preamble, this is Lori Knapton, "Did Mark leave a rocking chair in our entryway this afternoon?"
She gets right to the point.
She does. And Janelle just casually, cheerfully replies, "Oh, he must have dropped it off then. We're downsizing, and Mark thought you might like to have it."
Wow.
It is so incredibly casual. Lorien is practically in tears, thanking her profusely, and she asks how much money she can pay them for it. And Janelle flat out refuses to accept a single dime.
The emotional contrast here is profoundly moving. Think back to 1967. The young Lorien experienced acute, helpless sadness over losing the chair. It was taken from her.
Against her will.
Right. Now, as an adult, she is experiencing overwhelming joy because it was freely, purposefully given back. The chair returning wasn't just a delivery of antique furniture. It was the delivery of unresolved childhood comfort.
Yes.
It is a psychological loop being lovingly closed after half a century.
It is incredible. So what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? To me, it feels like the ultimate example of compounding emotional interest.
Yeah.
Or a massive boomerang of kindness.
I like that, compounding emotional interest.
Think about the entire chain of events. Lorian's mother, despite her immense grief and financial panic in 1967, made a decision to sell the chair to this young, newly engaged couple for a very reasonable $50.
Which was a big deal for them.
Exactly. She gave them a beautiful piece of history to help start their new life together.
Mm.
That initial transaction, born out of a desperate time for the mother, planted a profound seed of goodwill.
And that goodwill grew.
Decades later, that goodwill is compounded, and it comes back around when the couple realizes the heirloom truly belongs with the little girl who loved it first.
Compounding emotional interest is a brilliant way to frame it, and it speaks deeply to the philosophy of stewardship. Mark and Janelle are remarkable people because they never viewed themselves as the ultimate possessive owners of this chair.
Right.
They viewed themselves as its caretakers for a specific season of their lives. When it was time for them to downsize, the modern pragmatic impulse would be to sell a 150-year-old solid oak Victorian antique at auction for a significant profit.
Which they easily could have done.
They absolutely could have, but they didn't do that. They prioritized the emotional architecture of the original family over their own financial gain. They chose kindness over commerce.
It is so exceedingly rare to see that level of pure, unadulterated generosity today. It really forces you to step back and look at the deeper philosophical reflection here.
It does.
What does the physical journey of this specific chair actually teach us about family, about heritage, and about the things we leave behind?
This brings us to the final synthesis of Lorian's narrative arc. We have to look at how she integrates this returned artifact into her current life, because it is deeply symbolic.
Well, let's talk about that. Because right now, today, the Victorian seamstress rocker sits proudly in Lorian's living room. But it doesn't sit alone.
It sits next to something else.
It sits right next to a beautiful mahogany curio cabinet. Now, this curio cabinet is also a piece of memory from her mother's house. It was given to Lorian years later when her mother eventually had to downsize and move into assisted living.
Okay.
And here is the truly magical, almost unbelievable part. That exact mahogany curio cabinet used to sit right next to the rocking chair in the den on Oneida Street back in the 1960s.
You're kidding.
I'm not. After decades apart, they have been perfectly reunited in a new century.
Wow. What's fascinating here is the spatial recreation of memory. By placing the chair and the curio cabinet side by side in her adult home, she is literally physically recreating the geography of her childhood sanctuary.
She's putting the puzzle pieces back together.
She is rebuilding the safe harbor. It is a tangible wooden monument to her parents, to her own childhood resilience, and to the enduring continuity of her family's story.
It gives me goosebumps. It really makes you look around your own living room, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder what invisible stories your furniture holds.
It really does.
This story is such a powerful inspiration for all of us to value our own family treasures. And I want to be clear, it is not about financial value or appraising antiques. It is about the stories attached to them.
Absolutely.
Imagine being a parent and being able to use heirlooms like this to deeply bond with your own children. You can point to a chair and say, your grandmother learned to read in this exact chair, or I kicked these very rungs when I was your age and I was angry.
It grounds a child.
It does. It teaches them that they are not just isolated individuals floating in the modern world, but rather they are vital links in a much longer, much older chain of humanity.
It provides children with a deep sense of historical groundedness, which is increasingly rare. And if we look at Lorian's internal journey, we see a complete emotional transmutation.
Transmutation, I like that word.
The chair initially represented a site of trauma for her. It was hauled away during the absolute darkest point of her childhood, right after the loss of her father, amidst the chaos of a torn-apart house.
It was a symbol of loss.
But its unexpected return fundamentally rewrites her memory of that loss. It transforms a narrative of grief into a narrative of profound, enduring gratitude.
Yes. And Lorian writes about this realization so beautifully in her piece. She says that every single time she passes by the chair now, she is overwhelmed with gratitude.
Oh, it's wonderful.
But she clarifies, and this is the absolute most important part. Her gratitude is not actually for the rocker itself. Yes, it is a beautiful, solid oak antique. But her true gratitude is for the kindness of an exceptionally good man and his gracious wife who understood, quote, the value in the memories of a little girl.
That is the ultimate crux of the entire story. The oak chair, for all its history and craftsmanship, is merely the vessel.
Right.
The true gift, the thing that healed the 10-year-old inside of her, was the recognition and validation of her childhood self by another human being.
He saw her.
Mark remembered the pesty, grieving 10-year-old girl. He held on to that memory for decades, and he honored her. He and Janelle showed us that simple gifts and simple acts of remembering can teach profound lessons about the long-term, quiet power of human kindness.
It really is a masterclass in human generosity. It wasn't about the $50 back in 1967, and it wasn't about whatever the high antique value of the chair is today.
Not at all.
It was purely about honoring a child's memory and bridging that massive gap between childhood grief and adult gratitude.
It also contrasts so sharply with the disposable hustle and bustle of modern life we talked about earlier.
Oh, completely.
In a world where we are constantly moving, constantly upgrading to the next new thing, and casually discarding our past, this story begs us to slow down. It asks us to consider the emotional resonance of the things we choose to keep.
And the profound, life-altering impact of returning something to its rightful emotional home.
Exactly.
What a magnificent multi-generational journey for one single piece of furniture. Just take a step back and think about the massive timeline we've covered today.
It spans a lot of history.
This Victorian seamstress rocker started its life in an 1848 railroad hub, providing physical support for a working-class woman mending heavy wool uniforms.
Right.
A century later, it transitioned to become a comforting anchor, a reading nook, and a timeout chair for a little girl whose world was about to shatter from losing her father.
Such a dramatic shift in purpose.
It was then purchased for $50 out of sheer economic necessity and was lovingly stewarded for over 3 decades by a kind carpenter and his wife. And finally, driven by nothing more than a quiet, unassuming act of small-town generosity, it made its way back home to sit next to the very curio cabinet it lived beside half a century ago.
It is a remarkable, deeply satisfying full circle. And it leaves us with something quite profound to consider regarding our own relationship with the physical objects that furnish our lives.
What's that?
When we inherit, or when we buy an antique piece of furniture, do we ever truly own it? Or are we merely temporary guardians, keeping the wood polished and the memories warm until it is time to pass it on to the person who needs its comfort the most?
That is the perfect question to leave you with today. Look around your room, look at the things you hold dear, and ask yourself who you are keeping them warm for. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.